What is up, everyone? Welcome to the Mind of Marsal podcast. This is episode number 145. I'm your host, Armando Marsal. You can find all of my work over at fantasyguru.com. Follow me on the Twitter or X machine, whatever it is you call it nowadays, at Armando_Marsal, as well as on Instagram threads and TikTok at Mind of Marsal. Before jumping into it, I just want to thank each and every one of you for tuning in. I greatly appreciate you all. Remember, folks, if you're enjoying the podcast, join the content, please make sure you like, follow, rate, review, wherever it is you're consuming the podcast. For those of you who are first-time listeners, welcome. For those of you who have been listening to us here the last couple of weeks and the last couple of years, welcome back to the show as part of our division by division series recapping the 2025 season and looking ahead at 2026. We are shifting our focus today into the NFC South. We're going to be breaking down where each team stands right now following free agency, discussing some of the impacts of the new coachings and the coaching changes across the division, and take an early look as we head into the 2026 offseason. With me to do it, as usual, is my guy, Tyler Buecher. Tyler, how's it going, brother?
What's going on, Armando? Happy to be here, ready to chat some football. We've got some March Madness going on in the background, keeping our focus and our wallets stacked. But ready to talk about some NFC South action here. One of my favorite divisions in the entire NFL.
Dude, yeah, we got March Madness going on. MLB opening day is right around the corner. A couple days now, right around the corner there. So lots of sports. UFL is kicking off as well. Like it's just a great time of year. We still got basketball rolling. Obviously, the NFL. We talk about this all the time. A year-round sport, really, right? Like it's just there's no breaks in the NFL. We're free agency. NFL draft is around the corner. Like just it's a great sport. So yeah, obviously, for those the sports fans nowadays, a great time of year, right? This second. So, but yeah, looking forward to talking about the NFC South with you. We've been doing each division here on the podcast. Now, this is our fifth or sixth division we'll be covering here. We already did the entire AFC. If you haven't checked that out, go check those out. You can find that pretty much anywhere where you consume podcasts. There, Mind the Marsal podcast. We've talked about a lot of teams here, and now we have a little bit more information than when we started doing the series. You know, we have free agency kind of, I don't want to say completely behind us, but the tail end of it here now, as most players have signed here. There are some notable players still out there, but again, most of the teams have done what I think they're planning on doing here and waiting for the NFL draft. So you mentioned the NFC South. I think it was quite the division last year, right? Like it was a three-way tie when you look at record. Carolina Panthers, Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and Atlanta Falcons all finished 8-9 last year. The New Orleans Saints 6-11, pretty competitive, but not great division here when you look at it. Tyler, overall thoughts from last season? Were you surprised by any of these records? Were you surprised by any of these teams? I guess my takeaway is Tampa Bay just battled a ton of injuries, and I think that's kind of why they fall off there. Um, but I was excited to see Carolina's, kind of I want to say growth and step forward that they took here last year. So, what were your takeaways here from this division in 2025?
I think my big one would be probably how close this was across the board. Like we just finished the NFC North in our previous review, and every team in the NFC North had a positive scoring differential. The NFC South was in the other direction. Every team had a negative scoring differential. Every team also went 3-3 in the division. Very, very competitive, very, very close in terms of who could have won it this year. It came down to the final week 18 and it came down to tiebreakers of all things. So I think this was a very, very fun, challenging year for NFC South teams. It makes the division very interesting as we look forward to 2026. As we could see once again that parity make it anyone's to grab. I think the Saints were also a team that they may have finished fourth in terms of the overall record there, but they were hot to close out the year with Tyler Shook. I believe he won four of his last five games. Could have been 5 of 5 outside of a missed field goal. So I think this NFC South division is going to be a really fun one to look forward to in terms of who could possibly win it, betting odds in case you're into that futures market, and just the overall turnover we have across some of these squads is going to make this a fun one to chop up as we get through here today.
Yeah, man, I genuinely think it's anyone's game here in 2026. Like, I don't think there's a strong favorite. I think going into last year, most, including myself, thought, it was going to be Tampa Bay, to take on the division. I do think that they suffered a lot of injuries and just didn't play their greatest football last season. They had some turnaround this year. That's going to be interesting to see how that shapes out. Like you mentioned, I
Mhm.
think the Saints, man, like, Tyler Shook surprised a lot of people. We're going to talk about that too. I think he surprised a lot of people there. That offense looked good down the stretch. They've added some pieces here. I don't know, man. I think it's going to be a fun division. Do I think any of these teams are juggernauts and have are going to be Super Bowl contenders? I don't think so. I don't think we have that just yet here in this division. But I do think it's going to be a close race to the end, to see who wins this division. And because of that, I think it's going to be fun for fantasy purposes, right? Because there's going to be some meaningful games down the stretch here for a lot of these teams. So we're going to chop that all up here. And as we've been doing each and every show, we'll go in alphabetical order, and we'll talk about the Atlanta Falcons first here. They finished 8-9 here. I think the biggest, offseason move so far, Tua Tagovailoa, they added him on a cheap contract. I think it's a low risk, high reward kind of deal for them. With Michael Penix there returning from injury. You got two lefties here. They retained Kyle Pitts. I think that was big for them as well. Someone who, had just a huge season last year, right? Surpriser. I think expectations were finally met for fantasy managers there from Kyle Pitts. It only took how many years, Tyler? A lot of years there. So, they did lose Tyler Algier. I think that's going to benefit Bijan, right? We saw Algier cut into his workload at times, especially in the red zone. I think that's going to benefit Bijan. But what are your thoughts here on so far what they've done in free agency? Looking ahead at what we're expecting here in 2026 from Atlanta. After I think it was an okay season, not great, but okay season for them last year.
Yeah, I'll start at the top. Big changes across the board for Atlanta. New general manager Ian Cunningham comes in. He left the Bears front office, now joining Atlanta. He replaces Terry Fontenot, who I think made some questionable moves over the last 5 years. Wasn't my favorite general manager, to be honest. We got a new coaching staff here as well. Kevin Stefanski comes over from Cleveland, brings Tommy Rees, his offensive coordinator, to retain the same role that he had. I'm pretty blah on the retainment of Reese. I thought like maybe we could have seen some kind of shakeup there. Um, Stylistically, I do think we will see some differences between the 2025 Falcons and 2026 with these two. Notably, Michael Penix had an 80% shotgun rate last year. That was top five in the NFL. Atlanta was 31st in play action rate. The Browns, they're a team that's going to really flip these rates on their head. They're much closer to league average in both shotgun rate and in play action rate. And I think we're going to see a lot more of Penix under center, where we saw some really good splits from Penix when he was under center. 9.5 yards per attempt compared to 6.1 in the shotgun. His passer rating jumped up almost 20 plus points. Play action and versus no play action, the same benefits. We saw spikes in yards per attempt and passer rating. So I think we could see some improvements here from Penix once he's healthy and back under center. They also brought in Tanner Engstrand, the pass game coordinator. Comes over from the Jets, where he had that 1 year trial run. He was kind of like a Detroit Lions wonderkid. Didn't really do much in that first Jets season. They let go of everybody in New York, so I'm not surprised to see him go. But um, kind of interested to see what he does after operating as that same role, pass game coordinator for Detroit from 2023 to 2024. Maybe we can get a bump there in Penix's production and play as we move forward. As far as other big names, like I think retaining Kyle Pitts was huge. You mentioned that right off the get go. Took what 5 years to get there, but we're finally seeing him be productive. And the history that Stefanski's had with tight ends in terms of making them very fantasy productive is among the best out there. So I'm pretty optimistic towards Pitts retaining that finish that he had in 2025, carrying that over into 2026. What else? Big news. I think that's probably the biggest thing is just Pitts. He was probably their biggest question mark in terms of like they needed a playmaker opposite Drake London. They let Mooney go, but keeping Pitts I think was super wise. But really, this position comes down to, or this offense, pardon me, comes down to what kind of steps forward can we get from Penix after what we saw last year? And he's coming off another ACL tear. Um, I'll pass the baton over to you. Thoughts on Penix and this future for the Falcons passing attack?
Yeah, I'm a bit bearish on it if we're being honest, right? He's returning from an injury, like you mentioned, another ACL tear. Very difficult to stay on the field for Penix. That's been the recurring issue with him. They added Tua Tagovailoa, another player who's had issues staying on the field, with his concussion history, and just injury history there. He does get a fresh start, right? We've seen this now in the NFL. Now in recent years, I mean, you saw it with Sam Darnold last year. We've seen it with Baker Mayfield. We've seen it with several quarterbacks here where they kind of get a fresh start somewhere else and they're able to live up to expectation as, or at least play at a higher level. We've seen Tua Tagovailoa peak in the NFL. He had that one really good season, but it just has never been consistent for him, and he's never been able to reproduce that. So like for me, like I'm not like excited about this offense going into 2026. In addition to the changes, like you mentioned, some of the changes that they made, the coordinator change. I'm not optimistic about it. Like I'm gonna like kind of treat this as one of those situations where I'm taking the wait and see approach. I'm gonna see how ADP works out and shapes up for some of these players and whether I want to invest on where they're going or not. The one player I am very confident about here is Bijan Robinson. I think arguably the best running back in football. He's probably going to be that that RB2 on my board going into this season behind Jahmyr Gibbs. But again, I expect his usage to be through the roof. I think Drake London will be fine regardless of who's under center here. I think we saw that last year. I think he's an elite receiver when healthy. So for me, I'm not too concerned about him. And I'm just concerned about the changes in this offense, like and the scheme and how it's going to affect these ceilings here when it comes from a fantasy standpoint. But um, a team that I still think could use help at the wide receiver position. We'll talk about that too, but I think they could bring another good receiver. They did sign OZ from Chicago, but I just don't think that that's what they're looking for. And I
Hmm.
think it's going to be Drake London, Kyle Pitts, the second option here, and then you go from there. But Kyle Pitts, 23% target share last year. I think that's a significant number. I think that 20 plus is very, very much here in play again this year. I think he's going to be a big part of this offense. That's why they kept him around. But again, the changes of the scheme here are what concern me, Tyler. You talked a little bit about the numbers there. Who do you expect to be under center in week one here, Tyler? Do you think it's going to be Penix? Do you think he's going to be healthy to to start week one? Or do you think it's going to be Tua Tagovailoa? Or do you generally see a true competition here between the two going into the season?
I think it'll come down to the recovery of Penix. His injury is a 9 to 12 month timeline, so it's like putting him right on the cusp of week one readiness at best case scenario. So again, keep in mind he played 9 games before the injury, so I think at best we're looking at the 9 month, more likely a 12 month recovery. So I would probably pencil in Tua to be the starter, and then from there it could just be whoever's got the hot hand. If Tua starts the season hot, it's hard to probably go back to Penix, given that Tua wasn't signed to a lofty contract. Um, I found the pairing interesting as we often talk about teams that build around archetypes at QBs. Usually we talk about that in the form of mobile quarterbacks with a mobile backup, but lefty and lefty that kind of just helps the offense maintain some continuity there. So I did like the signing here of Tua. But yeah, I think we'll have like a legitimate competition here. But the pair of lefties really helps when it comes to blocking pass patterns. I'm very interested to see how this all plays out. And I'm on the page where you said quarterback battle. That sounds spot on to me. We'll just have to see where Penix is come middle of the summer, which is closely approaching. I mean, we're not that far away from camp's opening.
Yeah, I mean it's really right around the corner. Like that is right around the corner, and I think I could see Tua Tagovailoa being the week one starter, but I don't necessarily think that that's here permanently, right? I think that there is at some point going to be some type of competition, but because of where Penix, like the timetable with Penix, I do think it's difficult for him to put himself in a position to take that in starting job in week one. I think it is going to take some time. But I think it's a great point that you brought up, right? Because had they brought in a righty quarterback, I think you have to change a lot in this offense going into the season, and you're going to have to prepare one way. And then when you have Penix coming back, you have to prepare a different way. It's a different blocking scheme, pretty much different everything with the offensive line. So it changes everything when it comes to blocking. So I do think it was a very smart of them bringing into it. And at the end of the day, Tyler, like the risk that they're taking is very minimal, right? Like
Mhm.
what was his like what's his contract? It's I don't want to say bare minimum, but it's close to bare minimum.
Yeah, I don't have it in
Um
front of me, but it's
it,
it
it was
wasn't
like a
much.
Russell Wilson situation, right? Where they were able to give him peanuts because Russell Wilson was still collected from his previous team a couple years ago. Like this is what we're seeing with Tua Tagovailoa here, and with what we've seen with Kyler Murray. So look, I'm not. Are you going to be investing here at the quarterback position in fantasy?
No, no, because we don't have any kind of clarity in terms of the potential length that each one would be starting. So like getting a Tua starter for what, 4 weeks is a possibility. It could be 4 weeks, and then we've got Penix. I'm not going to waste a best ball draft pick on that. Redraft, you're probably not going to be getting much value here either because it's going to be a run first offense under Stefanski. They're going to want to lean on Bijan heavily. Um, I'd rather just invest in the guys that we know are heavy hitters like Bijan and Drake London.
Yeah. The team added Jahan Dotson. That doesn't do anything. That doesn't move the needle for me. Does it move anything for you? Or even OZ?
So this team is crazy thin in terms of depth. And then they let Darnell Mooney go. They let some other pieces go. I thought it was wise just to not make it a glaring need as they get ready for the NFL draft. But Jahan Dotson, a small built field stretcher. Olamide Zaccheaus is a good slot receiver. These are just like plug and play options where we just are filling out the depth chart in pencil right now here in late March. They're not necessarily starters. And this team, again, doesn't have their round one draft pick. They traded it away to get James Pierce. We'll talk about him later in the 2025 NFL draft. They do not have the round one pick because of that. So now we've got fewer bullets in the chamber to go get replacement wide receivers in the draft. We're looking at a day two selection at best. Pick 48, pick 79, maybe one of those picks is used at receiver. I could easily see one of them used there, given how much of a glaring need it is. And the fact that they've also got to pay Drake London next year. Like they really got to invest here at receiver. Like it's a big need.
It is. It is. Do you think the addition of Austin Hooper's transitions into a change of what we're going to see personnel wise?
Not necessarily. Cleveland wasn't afraid to use 12 and 13 personnel under Stefanski, so I would imagine we're going to see a good amount of that here. When you look at how thin the receiver group is, maybe it does make more sense to put that guy out there, Austin Hooper or even Charlie Warner, a great blocking guy, trying to just get more big bodies out there and create some big rushing lanes for Bijan. So yeah, maybe we do see a bit of a downturn in that in terms of like alignment and personnel. Um, yeah, I think that's a good call.
Defensively, they lost their corner Ford. They added Caden Ellis, linebacker there. I think that was a good addition. We talked about some of the offensive guys. They added or they added Cam Thomas as well there. So I'm sorry, they did lose Caden Ellis. They didn't add they lost Caden Ellis. And they did add Cam Thomas there, the edge. They added Christian Harris, the linebacker. Any of these moves seem significant for you?
Depth kind of reshuffling in my eyes because they lost two edge players in Leonard Floyd, Arnold Ebiketie. Um,
Yes.
just getting some depth there just kind of made sense to just kind of retool it. But edge remains just like a decade-long pass rush hunt for the Falcons. Uh, I mean, we got the James Pierce off-field transgressions. He's likely not going to be playing. So when you consider that they doubled down at edge last year in the draft, I think they're gonna have to do it. At least spend some good capital at it again because these guys, Cam Thomas, Samson Ebukam, they're fine role players, but not star players. And this team desperately needs a star player at edge.
Yeah, so I have right here on my end, I have team needs, wide receiver, and then defensive line. I think both tackle and edge are needs here. Um, is that what you're seeing too?
Yeah, edge is among the most important needs for this team. Argue offensive tackle is also super important. Both Jake Matthews and Caleb McGarry are on the wrong side of 30. McGarry's coming back from a serious injury. He didn't play at all last year. They're also bringing in a new offensive line coach, Bill Callahan, a guy that we all like at Fantasy Guru. So maybe they got the chance to develop the next wave of offensive linemen because this is a offensive line that's getting pretty long in the tooth when you look at the players on an individual basis.
Yes, yes, you are absolutely right there. And we talk about this pretty much every podcast, right? Every episode, like trenches is where it matters, and this is another team that's right there where they can work and beef up both sides of the trenches here.
Mhm.
But I can see where they beef up the wide receiver position too. It's a need. You really need someone alongside Drake London here that to really help out.
Yeah.
Um,
If we exclude London and Mooney, their receivers in total combined for 449 yards. Like it's a position reload that's desperately needed.
well, I'm looking at you look at the numbers, right? And you when you look at Mooney, he had 72 targets. Bijan had 109. Drake London had 111. Kyle Pitts had 118. Next was David Sills, 36 targets. Like, and then you had no one else had above 20 targets. It was really bad here. Like it
Mm.
was, and it kind of got worse, like to a certain extent, I think, right? Like I would venture to say Mooney's better than Dotson and OZ. You can make
Yeah,
a case for go ahead.
I was gonna say it's the same thing we saw last year with Zach Robinson. This offense just really did their 11 personnel and they did it heavily. Where keep in mind Robinson comes from the McVay tree. McVay in like the early 2020s was super heavy into 11 personnel, almost to a fault. Like the Robert Woods days, the Cooper Cup games, we saw a lot of those guys consistently in the slot doing the pre-snap motion, and they just kind of worked out of 11 personnel, just manipulating where the guys were. Robinson did that these past 2 years where we basically had three receivers, the tight end and the running back, all log like top five marks in terms of the team's target share in back-to-back seasons where the wide receiver four, very distant in terms of usage and utilization. Tight end two, distant in usage and utilization. So we will see a big change with that, with Robinson now in Tampa Bay and uh, Stefanski here now calling plays. It's going to be a little bit different here in terms of formation and even just player rotations, where we saw in Cleveland, like there are many times we saw different wide receivers out there in Cleveland, whether due to injury or just need. Um, I'm just envisioning this being a very different looking offense than what we saw these last 2 years.
Yep, I agree 100% there. Where would you say we're going into the season? Where would you rank Atlanta in the NFC South as far as where you think they could finish?
I've been a vocal Michael Penix hater, so I'll say I'm not very bullish on the squad as a whole. I think we're probably looking at best a 500 season. Like last year, 8-9 was what they got. I don't know if they get 8 wins this year. I'd put them more at like the maybe a 7-10 record.
I think they could have done better last year. There was some games that were mismanaged, but again, I think they could take a step back this year. If we're being honest, so I'm with you. I'm bearish here as well. Anything else that you want to discuss here with Atlanta as far as what we're looking at, or anything else?
Um, I like what we saw with Jeff Ulbrich. He was their defensive coordinator. They retained him despite changing some of the coaching staff. Ran a 3-4 heavy scheme. They blitzed a ton. They played a lot of single high coverage with a lot of zone-based coverage on the outside. Uh, I've liked what I saw from Ulbrich, so I'm pretty bullish on what we've got in terms of like a scheme and some of these guys that are potential stars. But I don't know, maybe an off-ball linebacker like replacing Caden Ellis. I think is no easy task given all the things he did in the scheme. Um, Divine Diablo is like the only guy of note. Like I could see them going the veteran route and investing a draft pick here. We just need kind of one of those guys that can do it all. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
cover the pass, rush the passer, play the run, and those guys aren't they're not a dime a dozen guys that do all three of those. They're like the five tool baseball prospects. They're tough to find, but I think this defense would be fantastic if they could get it. It could elevate them beyond the 7-win marker if they get that green dot linebacker that can just do it all.
Is there anyone in free agency right now that you think makes sense for them, like that's still available?
A lot of the guys are just older guys
Yeah.
now. So like they kind of lose that ability to play the pass as well. They lose that ability to have that quick first step on pass rushes. So no, maybe we need the rookie there to come in there and be a difference maker.
Yeah, I agree with that right there. All right, Carolina Panthers. So this is a team that I mean, look, Bryce Young, they took a little step forward there, man. Looked good last year at times, from time to time. They did lose Rico Dallas, so no major coaching changes of note on my end. Do you have any major coaching changes here, or any major coordinator changes?
They promoted Brad Idzik to play caller this year. So he was their offensive coordinator previously. He just was promoted now to play caller. So we got a new young guy in there calling plays, which I think isn't a bad thing. Canales was a very run heavy guy, leaned on the defense, played slow. Kind of was just a team that didn't want to make mistakes. They wanted to lean on the run and just kind of not put Bryce Young in the spot to play hero ball. Pardon me. Um, Idzik might be better in terms of like losing that over tendency to be super conservative. So I think that might not be a bad thing. I'm kind of actually optimistic about some kind of change just because of what we've seen these past few years with Bryce Young. And there's been some progression throughout his career. Like Young hasn't stayed stagnant. Like we saw the year two early benching, but this past year, career highs in completion rate, passing touchdown rate, yards per attempt, passing yards per game, and overall passer rating. The progress was great, but those were all still below league average. So I would like to see Bryce Young take that next step. They're still trying to figure out if they want to do the fifth year option with him or a long-term contract. So I think bringing in a new play caller and trying to get the most and maximize Young should be what the season should be all about.
Yeah, I completely agree with that thought process. Like I'm not a Bryce Young guy. I've never been a fan. I've always been bearish on him. Like you mentioned, like he has, and I said this, took a step forward, but that step forward was 3,011 passing yards and 23 touchdowns and 11 interceptions. That's it. Like that, it's not impressive. But again, it is steps forward, and they're minor steps forward after, a quarterback could lose his confidence right away, like if you bench him, right? And I think the fact that he didn't and he actually performed decent, I think speaks volumes of where he's at, least his work ethics here. So if I'm the Panthers, and maybe you see it differently, but if I'm the Panthers, I won't take that fifth year option. I would let him play it out this year and kind of wait and see what happens there. We've seen this, with some of the quarterbacks, like, and then you extend them. You see it with Tua Tagovailoa, we've seen it with Kyler Murray now, like, and it just does not work out. And I think if there's question marks, you just kind of let them play it out. And if it works out, it works out. As far as losses and gains here, so they lost Rico Dado in free agency. Um, they have Chuba Hubbard there, Jonathan Brooks returning back this season, hopefully. They beefed up the defense here, Tyler. So they've added a lot of pieces on defense here. They added Jalen Phillips, they added Devin Lloyd. They also retained their corners in Evans and Rochelle there. They did lose Christian Roseboom, and then they lost their center, Cade Mays. But they did add a tackle here in Rasheed Walker. As far as free agency is concerned, like any big wins here, because I think the Devin Lloyd addition here, I think that's huge. Like I think that's really big for this defense. I think that's going to be a difference maker. I actually like what they've done here in free agency, and I think this is a defense that is going to be much better than it was last season, at least, from based on what they've done here. So, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, Devin Lloyd was a huge get for them. This team definitely needed a prominent linebacker in the middle. They lost Roseboom to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. They just needed a legitimate difference maker. We've seen this Ajiro Evero, I think he's in year four, if I'm not mistaken, of running this defense. And I got to give my hat off to him. Like, this defense has consistently been, at best, a bottom 12 unit across the last 3 years, yet he's still managed to maintain his job. He's played a bend not break defense that has allowed the David Canales conservative play calling to actually work. So he's slowly let things turn around despite the all the turnover they've seen, particularly at pass rusher. I think the letting Brian Burns go, like over the last 3 seasons, they are dead last in total sacks. Last year they finished 31st in pressure rate. So getting a guy like Jalen Phillips, even though he's coming off some injuries and hasn't really been insanely productive, it may be arguably an overpay. I think it was a big get for them. Getting Devin Lloyd, super impressive there because prior to that addition, Trevin Wallace was a singular linebacker of note on the roster, and he underwent season-ending shoulder surgery late in December. So I actually had off-ball linebacker as one of their bigger needs in the offseason. So getting Lloyd just kind of nixed that in terms of uh, importance and need because I thought a starter was definitely needed, and they got arguably the best one out there in Lloyd. So I'm very eager to see what this defense looks like come week one, especially now that we've got, was it one, two, three, four, five, six, seven draft picks here that they still got to work with. Yeah, I'm pretty bullish on this turnaround for this squad. I like the additions on the defense that they made specifically, though, to answer the question.
Yeah, man, Lloyd. I mean, he's been a top 15 linebacker as far as PFF graded. Last year was top three among the 88 qualifiers. Like he's just been really good. I think he adds exactly what this defense last year. Like when you look at pass rush, they were ranked 31st in PFF by PFF. They were 23rd in rush defense. Like this changes the dynamics of this defense, and like you said, they can still continue to build off of that here. Shifting gears to the offense, losing Dotto, I think, is a big loss. He played a role there for them. Um, but they have Brooks, right? And I know he's battled injuries. Like, do you think he is going to be able to live up to those expectations when he entered the NFL? Or are you a little bit bearish on, his ability to stay on the field and what he's going to look like, after missing so much time?
Yeah, I think that's one of the bigger question marks for this team. Like they were very confident in letting Rico Dowdle test the open market. He was able to get some good money from Pittsburgh, so they ended up going elsewhere and just staying in-house. I mean, they got Jonathan Brooks, they've got Trevor Etienne. These are a pair of backs that I think they're kind of bullish on in-house. We got this good quote from General Manager Dan Morgan back in February. So I'm going to read the quote. Jonathan Brooks is trending in the right direction. He's flying around. He's big. He's beautiful looking. He's one of the more powerful, explosive athletes that we have. He's going to have an opportunity to compete to start for this team, just like a lot of other guys. So I like that quote. I think it tells us that they are optimistic in him possibly getting back close to 100%. I know I've got Brooks on a ton of dynasty squads because he was super cheap in rookie drafts when he was coming out due to injury. But after seeing how poor Chuba Hubbard played, like there were a lot of advanced stats that painted Hubbard in a very poor light. Like RB 49 out of 49 in explosive run rate, RB 49 in missed tackles forced per attempt, RB 47 in yards after contact, RB 40 in fantasy points per game. I think that there's room for an open competition because Hubbard to me just kind of was just a guy. And Brooks coming out, they spent a lot of capital to acquire him. I'm very interested to see how this plays out, but man, it's just tough to see a player coming off multiple ACL injuries, particularly at the running back position. So I'm optimistic. I'm not spending high capital to get Brooks right now in early drafts. I think that's a kind of a risky play, but uh, I guess it depends on your build so far and if you're like doing an early best ball squad, whether or not that risk makes sense.
Yeah, and it's interesting because there's still like several, and I'm not excited about many of them, but there's still notable names here on this depth chart, right? Behind Jonathan Brooks and Chuba Hubbard, like AJ Dillon's on this depth chart. Like, and again, we know where Dillon is at this point, right? Like, we know exactly what he is. We got ETN here as well. Trevor, not Travis, Trevor ETN here. Um, so I am very interested to see how Jonathan Brooks returns because I agree with you. I don't think Hubbard's a special. I was very surprised when they extended him the year before last. Like I honestly that caught me by surprise, and I guess maybe it had a lot to do with Brooks's injury and what, expectations were for him down the stretch. But um I, I I'm not necessarily thinking that Hubbard's going to be that guy for them this year. I'm interested to see how this shapes out. Um, the quarterback position, we talked about Bryce Young already. As far as from a fantasy standpoint, he finished QB 19 last year. Is he someone you're looking to invest in as your QB2 in a super flex league? I'm safely assuming you're not going to invest in him as your QB1, but in a super flex league, are you eager to get him out there? Or is his 16 PPR point or his fantasy points per game not super exciting for you?
No, I'm not eagerly targeting him. If I were to target him, it would probably be in the lens of getting a stud QB1, like a Josh Allen type, and then just kind of punting QB2, where I'd probably go two guys in this range of, let's say, Bryce Young. I don't know. I think probably quarterback 20 plus in most people's rankings. So I'd be grabbing him and somebody else close to that ranking. So I'd be double dipping as my secondary option and just kind of playing them based off matchups. Um, I mentioned the change in play caller to Idzik, who is just 34 years old. And I mentioned his age because I think we've seen a lot of younger offensive coordinators try to implement some things that have really helped quarterbacks in terms of like EPA boosting things. The Panthers, they were right around league average in both play action rate, pre-snap motion. They finished 31st in deep pass rate last year. I think these are all some small things that Idzik can introduce a little bit more of to kind of help this Panthers offense take a step forward. And it doesn't need to be a massive leap forward, but it can at least get this offense out of second gear that it seemed to be stuck in whenever Canales was calling conservative plays.
Um, yes, I agree with that. I think it's going to be, I think look, I think he's going to take I think Bryce Young could take another step forward here. I just don't know how big a leap it's going to be, right? Like that's my thing with Young. I think that his ceiling is to a certain extent capped. Um, so it just depends on what they get out of him as far as is he going to be a game manager and they're going to build a good enough team where he can win games like that. That's kind of what I see him as
Yeah.
here in Carolina. So from a fantasy standpoint, I'm out. You look at his pass catchers here. Tech McMillan, I think he had, in my opinion, a pretty good rookie campaign given the quarterback situation, right? Like I view McMillan, I'm like, with a really good quarterback, he could have had a monster rookie campaign. All right. He had 70 catches, over slightly over 1,014 yards, 7 touchdowns there. He was targeted 122 times, accounting for 26% of the target share. The team also has Jalen Coker, Xavier Leggett. We kind of get a lot of questions sometimes with these guys. Personally, I'm not interested in neither. I like the addition of Mechie here on this offense. I think that's sneaky fun, right? You mentioned field stretching right there. Yeah, we could do a little eat some of that can stretch the field. But what are your thoughts here on this receiving group? Because Ted McMillan finished as wide receiver 15 in PPR scoring last season. For me, you know, I'm okay with him as a wide receiver too. Despite Bryce Young being the quarterback there, I think he's capable of, picking up where he left off last year and kind of taking another step forward here, especially if we expect Young to take that slight leap forward. But I still think they can use help at the wide receiver position. But I think there's some interesting names here, Tyler. Talk to me about this group.
Sure. McMillan, Offensive Rookie of the Year, big year, 1,000 yards. Among all 52 receivers with 70 plus targets, he was wide receiver 22 in yards per out run, top six in end zone targets, and wide receiver 14 in first read rate, wide receiver two in overall air yard share. So getting another vertical playmaker, I think also makes a ton of sense here, which goes back to that thing I talked about, how they were 31st in deep pass rate. Getting a guy opposite McMillan, I think would also be helpful, but it also kind of shows where there's more room for McMillan himself to grow should we get a leap forward from Bryce Young in deep pass rate. Um, yeah, there's a good chance that this guy finishes. I could say north of 14 or 15 plus fantasy points per game. Last year he was at 12.4. So even just a modest bump there would get him from back end wide receiver two to maybe mid range wide receiver two slash front end wide receiver two in terms of fantasy. In terms of the Carolina Panthers actual wide receiver two position, I find the John Mechie edition super interesting because when you look at Bryce Young when he won the Heisman in 2021, Mechie was his go-to wide receiver one. It was him and Jamison Williams, uh, with Mechie leading the team in receptions. So I think that's a very interesting selection for a team like the Panthers, who's got Coker and Leggett, two guys that combined for less than 800 yards last year. Um, I think a strong wide receiver two was a big position of need. Not sure Mechie exactly fills it. It's kind of been around the block a few times now between Houston and the Jets, but and I think he spent some time with Philadelphia too, if I'm not mistaken. But I'm very interested to see if he can take a step forward, and maybe the reuniting with his former QB would be a helpful thing for him. So he's kind of my favorite like late round play. I'd rather take a shot on him over a guy like Leggett. Jalen Coker just seems like every other game he was making one of those spectacular catches that makes you go, wow. The problem was the Panthers weren't super pass heavy, so we never got to see a lot of volume, and it never really benefited fantasy wise outside of some, uh, I don't know, maybe some small DFS slates where 60 yards on a touchdown made a difference. The problem is we just weren't getting like the 100-yard games in the touchdown. So I think they've got an interesting group here. I will still maintain that Leggett was a wasted draft pick. Just year five breakout receivers are just something I'm never going to be interested in. Um, I don't foresee him being anything more than a red zone gadgety type weapon, which is fine for an offense that needs to convert red zone trips to touchdowns, but I don't know. I don't know. Maybe the depth behind these guys is also kind of lacking. So maybe someone else.
Yeah, I think that there is still a need here. I definitely think there's still a need here at the
Yeah.
wide receiver position without question. For me, I like the idea of though especially in best ball, where you take a couple shots at Mechie. I do like that idea. I thought that was very interesting. Um, Looking at the tight end position here, it's been not good since Greg Olson. That's how long it's been. Tommy Tremble, is he the guy?
I don't know. Yeah, I mean, he's due $8 million. I don't think that's how he's playing. I don't think he's worth that, but do they extend him? Do they manipulate the cap hit? I know that he's highly regarded inside the building for his blocking. Jatavian Sanders had a massive step backwards in 2025. I kind of made a note of the tight end position and just wrote the words directionless question mark because they've thrown some capital at it. Like Jatavian Sanders was an interesting pick coming out of Texas, but just really hasn't panned out. I don't know if that's more chicken or egg relative to the offense and the QB versus what Sanders himself brings to the table. But yeah, I mean, a difference maker here would be very interesting for this offense in terms of them trying to take a step forward. Maybe they go that path over investing heavily at a wide receiver too.
They could, right? Like adding Mechie could be a sign of okay, we'll see what we got with Mechie, Leggett, Coker, behind McMillan, and then add a tight end. I think that'll be huge for someone like Bryce Young, really. We didn't really talk about this, but what do you think about the addition of Kenny Pickett here behind him? Do you think that's gonna do anything as far as competition wise?
No, I got nothing on that one.
Yeah. Just wanted to toss it out there because we did talk about it. I That's how insignificant I thought that was, but just tossing it out there. All right. Anything else here with Carolina?
I'll say their defensive line should get some help there. A'Shawn Robinson left for the Buccaneers. Tershawn Wharton was PFF's 10th lowest graded run defender on the interior. So getting somebody there, some big bodies next to Derek Brown, who's got a huge contract, but getting somebody next to Derek Brown, I think would be a wise get. And then in the slot, I think they could use a slot cornerback where the Panthers were seeing some improvement with their outside guys, but they were top five in both yards per attempt and completion rate over expectation allowed to slot receivers last year. So I think an improvement there would be wise.
All right. Like I did the team before, where do you see Carolina in this division? Are they a top two team or another 500 team?
I think they have a chance to win it again. I think last year felt more fluky than anything because they lost their Week 18 matchup and still backdoored their way in due to other losses. This year, I could see them taking a step forward. Should everybody stay healthy? I think the losses that they sustained aren't irreplaceable. They just needed solid draft, and I think they are looking at a plus 500 record.
All right, there you go. A plus 500 record and potentially win this division. I could get behind that. I think they've made enough shifts and changes on defense. And if they can, if they do well in the draft, and if they continue to just make any additions in free agency, I think this roster arguably one of the better ones in the division here. All right, looking at the New Orleans Saints here, and I don't have any major coaching changes here as well, or coordinator changes noted on my end. Do you have anything major of note here at the coaching?
Let me just double check. I don't believe so. No, nothing.
The big stuff here, I think, adding Travis Etienne. I think that was huge here, man. This is a dynamic running back. I also like the addition of Noah Fant here, if we're being honest. I talked about Caden Ellis. They added him here, formerly of the Panthers. I think that was a good addition on the defensive side of the ball here. They also added David Edwards, the guard here. So they've beefed up the offense here. They retained John Ridgway. They did lose Taylor, the cornerback there. Cameron Jordan remains a free agent. They also lost Demario Davis, the linebacker there to New York. But I guess the big takeaway for me from 2025 was I was not expecting to, and I look, let's set this straight here. Tyler Schick didn't set the world on fire by any means. But he did play better than expectations, in my opinion, and created a spark in this offense down the stretch. And I think that's important here. And it looks like the team is ready to give them a shot in 2026. They've beefed up, they obviously added a running back, a really good running back, dynamic running back who can both run in between the tackles, catch passes to the backfield. I think Noah Fant's addition is interesting. They have Juwan Johnson there, but I think it's interesting maybe setting up for what we can expect this year as far as how they're gonna utilize this offense. That they added the offensive lineman there too. What are your thoughts going into 2026? Because I think there's still holes in this offense without question. And I'm not saying Tyler Shook is the answer, but I think New Orleans is ready to give this young man a shot in 2026.
I think the addition of David Edwards was the most notable one of the things that you listed there. Mainly because him added a line now gives them either all round one or round two picks in terms of everybody along the offensive line, left to right. really strong unit there, which when I'm building a team, that's how I would like to build it from the inside out, meaning addressing the trenches heavily with either a lot of capital or cap space. And they kind of did a combination of both with a lot of young players there. And then now the heavy hitter here in Edwards coming from the Bills. I love that move. Um, this team to me felt like they were purposefully gatekeeping Shuck, knowing that they couldn't go back to Rattler if Shuck were to have a slow start. So I felt like they kept Rattler out on the field for far too long, just so that they didn't have the chance to, uh, or the opportunity to see Shuck fail in a sense where they would go back to Rattler and then they'd be back at the drawing board come this offseason, basically. Shuck ended up being better than I think any of us projected. I know entering the NFL, I thought he had a big cannon of an arm. Accuracy was up and down. But the way he performed in Kellen Moore's offense, he was doing a lot more accurate passing. We didn't really see the deep shots in terms of volume, but he was just very impressive. So from weeks 8 through 18, when he was the starter, he was quarterback 7 in completion rate over expectation, quarterback 13 in yards per attempt, quarterback 9 in yards per game, and QB 16 in fantasy points per game, 16.6. That's not bad. Like, I, keep in mind the supporting cast here. They had Chris Olave, and that was basically it. Chris Olave, Jawan Johnson, and then we go down the pecking order to the starting receivers: Devon Vele, Mason Tipton, Kevin Austin. Very, very thin group here. I thought we saw the coaching adjustments by Moore do a lot of wonders with Shuck, and the growth looked linear to close out the season. I mentioned that they won 4 of the last 5 games when we started this podcast. They were just a missed field goal away from 5 of 5. And then we've heard all of these last 3 months, basically, since the end of the season, January, February, March, that this front office and the coaching staff, they're backing Shuck as their guy. So I'd love to see them add another weapon here. They've got the number 8 overall draft pick in this year's class. They have the chance to get whatever wide receiver they'd like. I think there's a good chance they could be the first one to currently buy. They could be the first one on the board to grab a wide receiver. As far as Shuck and fantasy, should they go that path, I think there's a good chance that we see Shuck return similar to production of what we saw last year, QB 16, where he would be an interesting player where I would add him like kind of in that same bucket as Bryce Young, as not a guy I'm actively targeting as my quarterback 2 in a 2 QB format or a superflex format, but as a guy where if I punt the position and I'm piecing it together with 2 pieces, he would be one of those pieces. So I guess I'm kind of optimistic here when I'm looking at the offensive line. I'm looking at Kellen Moore and the pace of play and the tempo that they have historically done under his offenses. There's a reason to be a little bit optimistic when we turn to the Saints offense. We just need more playmakers for them.
Yeah, I agree 100% with you. Like, so I am a little bit more bullish on Shook than I am Bryce Young. I like Kellen Moore. I think he's done a pretty good job, where he's been in most places he's done a pretty good job there. Obviously he got the best out of Shook last year. I agree 100%. I think that their biggest need really is, especially on offense, wide receiver. They have several needs, but I think their biggest need is wide receiver, someone along Chris Olave. Look, Chris Olave stayed healthy last year for the first season. We saw what he was capable of doing, having a big year. But let's not forget that there's a history here, right? Like, so
Yep.
if Olave goes down, like if you look at this depth chart right now, Olave goes down. You're looking at Bailey, Tipton, Kevin Austin, Jalen Polk, and Bub Means. It's not good, not good. Like, yes, you have 2 tight ends and Jawan Johns, but still not good at the receiver position. Do you think they go Cardinal Tate?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah,
I,
I think
I've
so
got him
too.
penciled there. And Jalen Polk, let's not forget about him. A round one, or I'm sorry, a round 2 pick from the Patriots just what 2 years ago. He was in that Rome Odunze class, and that Washington team where they were just throwing the ball all over the yard with Penix. Think he should get, if he's healthy. He's coming off a shoulder injury, I believe. Then maybe they have their starting slot guy there.
Yeah, he could come out as a starting slot guy. That's a name to watch, right? Like that's a name to kind of keep a close eye on all the beat reports and try to always remember the consistent ones, not the random,
Yeah.
calf picture or or tricep picture. No, no, the consistent steady beat drum there. So make sure you're checking out. I agree with that there. As far as Pope could be emerges as a relevant player in this offense. Do you think Noah Fant's presence is going to impact Juwan Johnson?
No, because Johnson to me is still that slot or move tight end with Fant operating more as like the Y or the inline guy. Um, Juwan Johnson last year, a pretty good fantasy performance last year, tight end 12, 10.6 fantasy points per game during the span when Tyler Shook took over. Um, I'm sorry, when Tyler Shook took over, those rates jumped even further. He jumped up to 11.3 fantasy points per game. Top 15 in both missed tackles forced, yards per out run. And given the lack of competition for targets, I think he's a good bargain right now in early drafts. Tight end 19 right now. So a strong click at ADP. We'll have to see if they add a receiver at note at 8 or 42 or 73. Basically a top 100. If they spend a top 100 pick, we could probably change our outlook for Jawan Johnson. But as it stands now, I think he's a smash in terms of a value.
Yeah, Ray and I talked about that on his, I'm sorry, Justin Fensterman and I talked about that today on the show, on the Fantasy Sports Daily. And there's a lot of interesting names in that range at tight end, a lot of really good
Hmm.
names. So yeah, I like Juwan Johnson. I think that there's a, I think there's a fun ceiling there. And I think if they don't make many moves here, I think he can continue to emerge. 18% target share last year, 102 targets there, for Juwan Johnson. So definitely a big part of this offense here. Looking at the backfield, how excited are you? Okay, are you excited about Travis Etienne this year or not so much?
All right, let's rewind the clock a little bit. 2, 3 years ago, ETN's yards per carry were dreadful. This guy could not get anything going basically, and that was with numerous offensive schemes. He's coming off his one of his biggest years in terms of rush share, almost a 70% RB rush share on the Jacksonville total pie, 66.7% of the running back target share. Um, we saw just a massive turnaround. I'm not sure how much of that credit I want to give to Liam Cohen versus ETN, who finished with, like, I think it's arguably his best season, 1,400 yards, 13 total touchdowns, finished the year RB16. We know running back's a volume-driven position. We know Kellen Moore's offenses. They are historically both high in play volume and high in pace of play. Alvin Kamara clearly cooked right now at this juncture. I think there's a good chance that we see ETN maintain a super high rush and RB target share rates that he had in Jacksonville, carry that over to here in New Orleans. Um, with Kamara just kind of on the back burner, I don't even know if he's fantasy relevant. I don't know if he's even going to play. He could be a post June 1st cut that could save the team $8 million. I don't think they do him dirty like that, but I don't think he's got any relevance whatsoever. So yeah, I mean, in terms of like landing spots, this is a W for ETN. I thought his best spot would have been staying in Jacksonville. This is not a bad number two.
No, it's not. I think the opportunities are going to be. I'm not concerned about Kamara. Whatsoever. I'm not concerned
Yeah.
about Alvin Kamara. My concern. So okay, so you said something that stood out. Like so, my concern was what his involvement in the passing game was going to be because a lot of his production came like he had 6 receiving touchdowns. This Travis Etienne last year, right? Like that bakes in a lot into that
It's a lot.
bottom line, right? But when you look at the numbers here, and maybe it was a product of the backfield and not the scheme and and what we're expecting, but Kamara averaged 3.5 targets per game last year. Like that was a significant drop off from his previous seasons, right? So, and then you look at everyone else and it was 2.2, 2.1, and then that's it. It was no one averaged more than one target per game after that. Um, do you think that that was a product of the backfield
I'm curious if it's more a product of
or
the
shook?
the offense, yeah, and shook and where plays are designed to go. Um, Last year, the Saints were bottom 7 in percentage of targets that went to the running back as a whole, despite Kamara being what we typically think of as the target eating guy. Just kind of wasn't really that in terms of 2025 relative to other seasons. Um, is that more indicative of Kamara offering nothing after the catch, or is that more indicative of the offense and how Tyler Shuck tends to play? Where I noted he's not a super high check down guy, and that um, there's the possibility that this is here to stay, and ETN just kind of gets a downward tick in terms of pass volume. I think that's super notable. Um, I think the to answer the question, I think we may need to come back to it and see what kind of capital they spend at receiver and at whether or not we've got some serious competition for ETN or if we're looking at, I don't know, him versus Mason Tipton for targets.
Correct. That I think that's going to be a key. That's definitely going to play a role in how his like what his role in the passing game is going to be without question. We really did talk a lot about Olave, but he had himself a huge season. Finished wide receiver six in PPR scoring. He had 1,163 yards, a career high nine receiving touchdowns, a career high 100 receptions. Was targeted 156 times, 29% target share. That's what a healthy Chris Olave is capable of doing. All right. Like this is a talented receiver here. Only with him, the only issue with him is he just has battled injuries, right? Throughout his career. Where are you at with him going into 2026? Are you viewing him as a top 10 or top 12 receiver, or is that a hefty price tag for him?
It's a hefty price tag, but he did finish wide receiver seven last year. That came again with nobody challenging for targets. He was the number one receiver in all of the NFL in terms of air yards, 1,800 plus, despite him only being featured in just 16 games. So he missed one of those games.
Yeah.
I was trying to think of how to answer this question. Do I want to invest in Chris Olave this year? Last year he was a hard fade for me where I avoided entirely. I got bit by that. I think players with 5+ concussions under their belt are players I'm just generally not going to gravitate toward. I'm going to be drafting dozens, if not hundreds, of best ball teams. I will not be avoiding Chris Olave this year. I will also probably not be exceeding a 1 in 12, so an 8.3% ownership rate of him in my total portfolio. I will be at best matching that 8.3%. That's kind of my stance on it. So if I'm doing a redraft league, a high stakes league where it's something that I'm investing a lot, either emotionally or fiscally, I will probably be avoiding Olave.
He's currently going wide receiver 11. I'm looking at it here. He's at least with the data I have, he's going wide receiver 11 on average and generally in that 26 to 28 range overall. That's the round. I'm a bit hesitant to click the draft button very often there.
Hmm.
Sounds silly, but I would prefer wide receiver 18-ish, 19-ish in that 40, 44 range. I feel like I'd feel a little bit more comfortable than that current range and current price tag. Um, Anything else here on the Oilers that you want to discuss?
I would add, in terms of like player needs, their defense is the reason why I don't think they're a team that can make a big run in the NFC South next year. I think slot cornerback's a big need. The front seven entirely, edge, interior defensive line, linebacker, all these positions, pardon me, I think are eligible for upgrades. And there's just not enough blue chip talent yet for them to make a deep run or even contend for the NFC South.
I agree 100%. Defense is a major team. They were a defense we would target often last year in DFS. They were a defense
Mhm.
we would target in, players against each and every week. So, you mentioned it, cornerback, defensive line, defensive end. They need a lot of help here, in my opinion, as well on the defensive side. And I agree. And this is probably why for me, they're probably the third, best team in this division. Right? They're kind of, in my opinion, they're right there with Atlanta when you're looking at it. So yeah, I agree with that 100%. Moving on to Tampa Bay, there are a lot of changes here going into this year. And it starts off with the offense coordinator. They hired Zach Robinson. You talked a little bit about him early on when we were talking about the Falcons there. They lost Mike Evans, someone who was a consistent piece of that offense for so many years here in Tampa Bay. And I get it, down the back end of his career, but still very, very productive when healthy. Was Mike Evans. Still a very big part of that offense. They also lost Rashad White. I don't think that's a significant loss. They did add Kenneth Gainwell. I think he's a better replacement for Rashad White. So I feel like he's going to add a different dynamic. We saw what he was able to do last year there in Pittsburgh. And then before we jumped on, you mentioned Levante David retired there. They've added several pieces here as well on defense. Here they added Alex Anzalone. They added Christian Roseboom there, formerly of the Panthers. We talked about him earlier. They did lose Charlie Heck. They did lose. Oh no, they retained. I'm sorry, Dan Feeney. That's a good retention there, and then retained K-Dot in here as well. Tyler, when you look at the offense coordinator changes and some of these free agent changes, looking at 2026, what are you expecting to be different here in Tampa Bay?
Let's start with 2025. And that year they lost Liam Cohen, and I think it had a major net effect across the board with this Bucks offense. Not only did they lose their play caller and their schemer, they lost several players throughout the year due to injury, and it was just kind of a snowballing effect where a lot of things kind of went wrong. Zach Robinson comes over from Atlanta. He brings TJ Yates, their pass game coordinator. He reunites with the tight end coach, Justin Peel. He also reunites with quarterback coach Chandler Whitmer. They brought him back from Indiana, who he just coached Mendoza going on a 16-0 season where they led the number three offense in the FBS. So all these guys kind of know each other. They work together. They're all now in Tampa Bay. Robinson stems from the McVay tree, so like we talked about, expect some of those principles to carry over here. But this will now be Baker Mayfield's fourth offensive coordinator in as many years. And I think the jury's still out on Zach Robinson. We saw a okay first half of the season from Kirk Cousins the first year he was brought into Atlanta, but he was also working without like a calf, essentially. He was very immobile. Then you had an inaccurate lefty in Michael Penix in 2025. I'll say after a down year from Baker and all the things that happened, I think we could see a nice bounce back from him. Maybe he flirts with the top 12 mark again in terms of fantasy production. Best case scenario. I think that's going to come down to health of a lot of his playmakers. We know Baker's a gamer. He's a lot of fun to root for. I just question, are we ever going to see the Liam Cohen version of Baker ever again? And I'm kind of more hesitant to say yes to that.
I agree with you because you saw the impact that Liam Coleman had in Jacksonville with Trevor Lawrence, right? Like he just got the best out of him in year one or one of the best seasons from Trevor Lawrence, right? So I agree. I don't know if we're going to necessarily see that Baker Mayfield we saw a couple of years ago, but I do think that this is a step in the right direction, right? I think there's potential for him to produce better numbers this year. He was also playing through injuries, and obviously this offense had a shitload of injuries as well last season. So that also didn't help out. It was offensive line and just the offensive players. Evans,
Everybody.
Godwin, everyone. Like I mean, it was not an easy season here for Tampa Bay last year. So for me, I think they're gonna. I like them in this division. I think in my opinion, they're my favorite. For to win this division. They just need some pieces on defense like that. They do need to beef up, and we'll talk about that here. But as far as the coordinator change, I think it's going to improve Baker Mayfield. I think it's a step in the right direction for him this year. Losing Evans is not ideal, but look, there's still Ibuka there. They still have Godwin. They retain K. Dot, and obviously they have Bucky Irving here. I think the addition of Gainwell is going to be. I think that's underrated. I really do think that's underrated. I think he's going to add a different dynamic to this offense, especially as a pass catcher out of the backfield. We saw him do that very well there in Pittsburgh. So for me, I think this offense it's looking good. I do think they need to continue to beef up the offensive line there. But for me, where you have Baker as far as going into 2026, like, is he outside your top 12 right now?
Yeah. Yeah, he's probably more closer to that Tyler Shook range, to be honest, QB2.
Really, all the way there?
Yeah. I think
Okay.
there's a lot of guys QB 13 to 20 that have a better outlook than Baker.
That's a fair assessment. I agree with you. And I think it's very important that you mentioned, right? Like how many different coordinators he's had. That truly impacts players. Like we see
Yeah.
especially the early stages of the group, and this is now happening, again, this is now the third coordinator he's had in 3 seasons. That doesn't help here all that much. Looking at this receiving group, Tyler, without Mike Evans, Evans accounted so Evans played 8 games last year. All right, Chris Godwin played 9 games. In those 8 games, Mike Evans accounted for a 23% target share. Chris Godwin's returning. He played 9 games. He had an 18% target share in those 9 games. Egbuka, um, 24% target share. Kind of got off to a hot start, cooled down. Baker was hurt. I think that played a role in it. How do you see this receiving group shaping out in 2026 without Mike Evans?
Let's start with Emeka Egbuka, the exciting one. Hot start, then fizzled out. I think he should get the runway as the number one outside receiver with Godwin in the slot. That's how I would organize this offense. Evans out of the picture, Godwin on the wrong side of 30. I think it really just elevates Ibuka to the top of the pecking order in terms of target share and target opportunities. 127 targets last year, led all rookies. Only McMillan had more receiving yards. 1.7 yards per run, kind of a middling number for a rookie. Not spectacular, but he did have a high 13.2 yard ADOT, and he was more effective on the perimeter where he had better yards per run and yards per reception than in the slot. The contested catches were an issue. So how I would take over this offense if I were Zach Robinson is I would do what I did with Drake London, where I had him as my primary outside guy, but I had him working closer to the line of scrimmage. Drake London, 11.1 and 11.2 ADOTs, the 2024 and 2025 seasons was Zach Robinson. Keep in mind, I just said Egbuka 13 too. So dropping that down a full 2 yards would lower those deep shots. It would lower those contested catch opportunities. Um, and then we also have to keep in mind that Baker was also not playing his best. So weeks 7 through 18, Egbuka had a 50% catchable target share to close out the year. So he was not getting good catchable volume. So there's like a real good runway for him to grow in terms of just taking a year two leap, being in the NFL, not being a rookie, and the fact that he's in a plus environment to do so. So he's the guy that I'd be circling as the player to target. Um, Chris Godwin, a lot of injuries over the last 2 years, 18 total, ankle dislocation, a fibula hairline fracture, coming off a career low in yards per out run, and a new offensive coordinator in town. I hate saying it because Godwin's one of my favorite players, but sometimes the fall for players is very sharp. And especially with a player coming off multiple injuries, especially with multiple injuries to the same leg, um, I'm a little sheepish on Godwin. I will say he's only like what 2 years removed from the phenomenal start of the year that Godwin had with Liam Cohen under calling plays. Godwin was like a slot god that year, just very, very productive. A part of me wants to hold on to that hope that he can return to it. Uh, but the pessimist in me is a lot more of a realist. And I'm afraid when you players are on the wrong side of 30 and a lot of injuries start piling up, that there's a low probability that they return to that. I'll also add they're pretty high on Jalen McMillan. Like they're trying to get him involved over Igbuka late in the year, which not necessarily a good sign for Igbuka's future, but I think it is a good sign for McMillan in terms of like what they've got here as a starting trio of guys. Then you throw in Cade Otton, who's just a snap eater. This dude's just consistently playing like 94, 95% of the snaps year in and year out, never leaves the field. A great wide blocking guy that never is going to be super high in terms of the target pecking order. In fact, the Bucks were 32nd in target rate to the tight end position last year, but he's just always out there. So I don't know. He's not going to guy that's going to get a high first read rate, not going to be a fantasy needle mover, but in a best ball format where you need a tight end three, sure. I mean, I don't know. He's got a 5.1 yard ADOT. Like that doesn't do anything. So we're gonna need like multiple injuries for Otten to become relevant, like he did 2 years ago. Otherwise, he's just the guy. That's kind of my overall thoughts on this passing attack. Like Buka up here, Godwin McMillan down here, and then Otten. Yeah, I don't care.
Yeah, it's only in Tampa Bay stacks. Man. That's it. Like that's
Yeah,
it. Tampa Bay stacks. You take a late round flyer on him, and that's it. Um, at best, he's a decent floor play in PPR formats, but not even because his role is very dependent on the health of all the other receivers on the team. That's we've seen that year in and year out. I don't think that changes here this year. Um, I think Ibuka, I'm seeing wide receiver 17, wide receiver 18. I really like that range for him. Let's not forget, man, in week 12, that's when I think it was week 11 to 12 when Baker just completely messed up that shoulder. And it was just not the same. Like it was pretty bad. I mean, they lost to a lot of bad teams down the
yeah.
stretch. Like it was pretty bad. So I definitely think that baked into the Ibuka struggles. He had some massive games early on in the season. I think if he, if Baker's healthy, I think we could see a pretty consistent high-end production from McBuka, especially with Mike Evans. I know they're talking about McMillan and featuring him and getting him a little bit more involved. I do think he's going to have a presence in this offense. I just don't think it's going to come at the expense of Ikbuka. I think Ikbuka is just that talented, where
Mhm.
he's going to emerge as the top and the priority wide receiver there for Tampa Bay. I'm with you on Godwin, man. Like I've always been a Chris Godwin fan since day one. Big Godwin guy. Um, I am a sucker. I'm seeing where he's going, that 44, 45 range. I will have a little. I'll dip my toes in that water, Tyler, but I'm not going to soak myself in it. That's for sure. But I'll definitely have some exposure there. Um, Bucky Irving. You mentioned Bucky Irving. How comfortable are you in taking Bucky Irving? I was not on him last year because I felt a lot of people were chasing his rookie production, so it kind of worked out for me. But after a subpar year based on expectations, where are you at with Bucky Irving in 2026, and how much are you concerned, if at all, regarding Kenneth Gainwell being in this backfield?
Uh, I was on the steam chasing play of trying to get some Bucky late in the year because I thought this team wasn't as cooked without Cohen. Very wrong take there. Let me start with that. Then I'll throw in all the offensive line injuries this team endured
Yes.
between Tristan Wirfs, Luka Decky, Ben Bredesen, Michael Jordan, Dan Feeney, like Cody Mosh. There were so many players across the board. Graham Barton was the only one that played the full 17 games for this team. The only player, I think, with over 800 snaps on offense, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. Uh, so we've got all these players that are being interchanged in terms of like throughout the season on the offensive line. Didn't really help. We have the fact that Bucky Irving missed weeks 5 through 12 with a foot sprain and a shoulder injury. He played with a shoulder brace upon return, but he was never really the same. Um, I'm going to give some quick stats, so bear with me here. These are his rates in 2024 and then the drop off down to 2025. Explosive run rate, he went from RB7 down to RB43. He went from in success rate RB7 down to 46. Missed tackles forced RB3 to RB35. Yards after contact per attempt RB4 to 46. The one thing he stayed consistent, the yards per out run, RB5 in back-to-back seasons. So he's still a good pass catcher, but the rushing production just fell off a massive cliff. I want to blame the injury. I want to blame the hesitancy. I want to blame the offensive scheme, and I want to blame the offensive line. Do we give him a full mulligan? Yeah, I don't know. Where's he going right now, Jess? Let's see where he is going first.
Is RB18. I'm seeing
Yeah,
RB18, RB17.
yeah. So that four round four turn basically.
Hmm.
Um, he's undergone offseason shoulder surgery. He should be good to go for 2026. But this team signed Kenneth Gainwell to a notable contract. It was a 2-year deal worth up to 14 million, almost 10 million guaranteed. And we are now a couple weeks in through free agency, us recording this late March. But it's very important to note that the Bucks were super early grabbing Gainwell while there were still a ton of players out there in free agency. He was one of the first backs signed early in the period. And keep in mind, this was when Tyler Algier was still available, who has ties to Zach Robinson in the Atlanta days. They clearly have a plan for Gainwell, and I think they're trying to really replace the 51% snap share that Rashad White had last year, where Gainwell across the board, very great in all those metrics I just listed off with Bucky's drop-offs. Gainwell, great in all of those, great in yards per out run as well. So he's that dynamic back that can do everything essentially. I think the passing role is going to come down quite a bit, going from Tampa Bay down to going from Pittsburgh to Tampa Bay because Aaron Rodgers lived on the underneath stuff. Baker, much more of a gamer. He's much more willing to hang in the pocket and throw it 30 yards downfield, hoping to get something. Um, but keep in mind, Bucky's missed now 10 total games for the first 2 seasons of his career. He's coming off shoulder surgery during this offseason. Again, they went after Gainwell for a purpose. So how do I feel about both of these backs? I'm kind of comfortably okay with them at each ADP, but I'd rather take the swing at Gainwell if I'm going to select one in terms of like a bucket. But this might be one of the spots where you do want to handcuff because uh, what do we have here? Sean Tucker, who like we love him in the dynasty community, but he has yet to really do anything aside from like a few games. Like when I say a few, as in like 2 or 3. Oh, sorry, hold on, my dog's doing something weird. Um,
He heard you say Sean Tucker.
yeah,
The dog.
sorry, she's like kicking my chair. Um, that's kind of where I am with it. I think this offense has the ability to take a big step forward. Should the offensive line stay healthy? Should we get better play calling from Zach Robinson relative to what we saw from last year's offensive coordinator? But there's a lot of moving pieces here. There's a guy coming off injury where I want to see how reports go in the summer in terms of what kind of timeline we're looking at for the return of Bucky.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Like this is the one team I'm most interested in seeing how it shapes out because there are so many moving pieces, like you said. There's a lot of questions regarding health. Godwin is one of those, the offensive line, Bucky Irving. Um, I'm really, I don't want to say fascinated, but I'm really excited about the Gainwell addition here. I think he's gonna elevate the usage in the passing game out of the backfield there for this team. So I'm excited. We saw how Robinson utilized the backfield in Atlanta, right? Like we kind of saw that. You so don't he had Bijan Robinson and he didn't stop using Algier. All right. So keep that in mind, ladies and gentlemen. Um Tyler, defense, I think this team needs a lot. This was a big issue for them last year. They one of the teams that we targeted a lot, especially through the air. Here I look at this team and I still think that they could use linebacker. I think they could use edge. I think they could use secondary. Um, where do you see them? Because I think offensive wise, I think they're okay. I'm always gonna say offensive line. Yeah, sure, you can add that. Every team can add offensive line, in my opinion. But outside of that, I think they're pretty set at each, skill position. I'm okay with McMillan as the number two there, alongside Ibuka and Godwin as your slot guy. And you mentioned Bucky. All that stuff is good. Defensive wise is where I see this team having a lot of issues here. Um, Talk to me about that. Do you agree? And then if so, where do you think is the biggest need here for this unit?
Yeah, I did the team needs prior to free agency starting, and then when I went back again through this, I was really impressed with all of the free agent additions they made, particularly on the defensive side. They added Al-Qaeda Muhammad from Detroit, where he had over 50 total pressures. They added Ashawn Robinson, 700 total snaps um, from Carolina. Alexander Zaloni from Detroit, another guy that's played a lot of snaps. Christian Roseboom, another guy with a lot of snaps. They are moving on from Levante David, who just retired earlier today. Um, Anzalone's 32. Like he's a short-term solution. Roseboom has been just a guy in my eyes, coming from the Rams to Carolina. Not a crazy impressive prospect. So I think adding linebacker is super important to them. But edge, defensive line, very important places as well. Vita Vea, 31. Aisha Robinson, 31. Both those guys a little older. I know the team likes Khalid Kancey, but injuries limited him last year. He's a former round one pick from 2023. I wouldn't call that a number one need, but it's not a position with depth, the interior of the defensive line. Then you add the edge guys. Is Muhammad and Yaya Diaby going to be their outside guys? If so, okay, that's okay. But I think more help and more depth is needed. They've chased us through free agency multiple years, kind of a lot of swing and miss signings. So round one picks as well that kind of didn't really pan out. Um, Sack numbers weren't really there last season. They were 37 total, 19th in the league. So I mean, we've got a quote from the general manager where they said they needed to improve the pass rush. Um, that's like, what was it, February 24th. In order to take the next step, we need to be able to get more pressure on the quarterback. Would not be shocked if that was what they did with their first pick, but I think you said it pretty well. Front seven makes a lot of sense across the board on defense. Interior offensive line, I think improving left guard would be wise. And are we sure Chris Godwin's going to be healthy? Are we sure Jalen McMillan can be that guy? Maybe another pick at wide receiver would make sense too.
I definitely think you can make a pick there at wide receiver. I couldn't agree more with that. And as far as defense, they've added some pieces, but like you said, I think solidifying that in the draft is going to be very helpful for this unit, in my opinion. Anything else here in Tampa Bay that we haven't discussed?
No, I think we covered it. They don't have a lot of cap space, so the rest of their moves are going to be have to they'll have to go through the NFL draft in terms of draft picks.
Yep, that is very true there. So there you go. The NFC South wrapped up. Tyler and I breaking it down here in full. Make sure you're checking all of the episodes out if you haven't already done so. Tyler, what else you got cooking this week? What else you got cooking here at fantasyguru.com? And where can everyone find you?
Yeah, all my content over at fantasyguru.com. We are in the middle of our rookie profiles, ripping them wide receiver profiles left and right, it seems. Doing one right now for Makai Lemon. Yeah, we'll have that out on Wednesday. But yeah, it's been a lot of fun diving into these prospects. A lot of them are interesting. The class as a whole, not the most exciting, if I can be frank. But I still think it's a very important process to do our due diligence, look at every one of these guys with a fine-tooth comb and try to find some of the diamonds in the rough if we can for our dynasty squad. So we'll be having, I think, 4 or 5 rookie profiles out every single week over at fantasyguru.com. All my content's there, and you can catch me on the socials. It's only on Twitter at Tyler Buecher, Buecher.
Make sure you're checking that out. So that's part of the franchise mode, ladies and gentlemen. You get that, you get free agency, you get NFL draft, you get UFL coverage, all of that good stuff over at fantasyguru.com. Make sure you're checking out that franchise mode packager if you haven't already done so. And if you need any questions, make sure you're emailing customer service. You can find all of my work over at fantasyguru.com. You can also follow me on the Twitter machine at Armando_Marsal, as well as Instagram threads and TikTok at Mind of Marsal. You can also find this show on YouTube at the Mind of Marsal channel there. So make sure you're checking that out. Remember, if you're liking the podcast, enjoying the content, make sure you follow, rate, review, like the podcast wherever it is you're consuming it there. Thank you all so much for tuning in. For the great Tyler Buecher, I am Armando Marsal. Hopefully you enjoyed this week's journey through the Mind of Marsal. Until next time, folks.